Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the CELADON Pharmaceuticals plc half-year results investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so, and these will be available via your Investor Meet company dashboard. Before we begin, I would like to submit the following poll, and I would now like to hand you over to the executive management team from CELADON Pharmaceuticals plc. James, good afternoon, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. My name is James Short. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CELADON. I'm also joined by Jonathan Turner, our CFO, and Arthur Wakely, our MD. So these are some of the operation highlights. I'm going to talk you through the slides a little bit more in depth in the presentation. But just before I go through that, what I want to highlight is the incredible achievements that the team at CELADON have managed to do, and we've had such a monumental year and milestones of achieving our MHRA licensing, which then therefore went on to achieving our Home Office license, which in turn then meant that we could sign contracts to sell products to the market. And then the other significant one is, we've managed to deploy some of the capital we raised at IPO into building out our phase 2, and then another milestone achievement we got from the NHS Ethics Committee. So as I say, I will talk to that a little bit more further. One other point whilst I'm on this slide is, some of the team that we've managed to bring on board over the course of this year as well. And this team is we brought them on board to get ready for this expansion. So Stuart, our business dev guy, his role has been 20 years in pharmaceutical sales, of which 5 in cannabinoids. So he's been instrumental in getting some of our LOIs now into meaningful contracts. We've also fetched on a GMP operator to help us scale up in our phase 2. So just to touch on the GMP, for those that you are aware or not aware, to be able to operate in this pharmaceutical space, one of the things that you have to do is adhere to what's called GMP, Good Manufacturing Practice. It is the MHRA who is the UK regulator for that. We spent the last 3+ years working with that regulator. And I have to say, it's been an incredible achievement. A lot of people say, regulators are hard on that, but they've been very supportive to us. It has been challenging, don't get me wrong, not just because it's pharmaceutical, but it's actually because of the nature of what we're doing, i.e. cannabinoids. So because it's new to the UK and certainly new to the regulators, it has had its challenges. But, we finally got there beginning of this year, which then allowed us to go to the Home Office, which is the other regulator we have to work with, and ask them to lift the condition that they put on us. And that condition was that we can't sell the product to the market until we got our GMP. Now that we've got that, the Home Office in March of this year lifted that condition, which now allows us to sell the product to the marketplace. And therefore, this is evidence of that. We've recently signed 2 contracts. What I would like to add, that these contracts didn't just happen overnight. These were companies that we've been working with for quite some time. And there's a number of other companies now that we've issued contracts to that hopefully in due course will now start converting those into more revenue. One of the significant contracts, companies we've been talking to is, they've done an awful lot of work. They've been to site. It just doesn't happen overnight, this thing. But we're really excited. And this is just a combination of the hard work that the company has done to get to this point. So as I said earlier on, we've managed to deploy some of the capital that we raised on IPO with our phase 2. Just before I go into phase 2 a little bit more detail, I want to touch on phase 1, This is an area of our facility that we've had operational now for a couple of years. It's the facility that we use to be able to demonstrate to the regulators that we can operate correctly under the GMP guidelines. We now have the whole entire production of phase 1 sold. We're now starting to deliver to that contract. Hopefully, that contract should be paying us revenue by the end of this year, which is fantastic news. So on phase 2, you can see on the picture there, as I said, we've started to deploy that capital. We started to build that out. We've designed phase 2 where we can switch rooms on as and when we need them within accordance to the contracts that we're getting. I use the saying, we're walking before we can run. And now that we are starting to see them contracts coming through, we're looking at bringing more meaningful space on in phase 2 towards the end of this year, going into next year. The other milestone that I'd mentioned was the LVL program. So just to reel back on that a little bit, we acquired a stake in LVL maybe 18 months ago, I think, from memory now. And LVL was a conditional approved trial. One of the conditions were that LVL had to go and get ethics committee approval before it could send the trial officially live. We went to the ethics committee, and at the 11th hour, this was middle of last year, they said, would we be prepared to do a 3-month observation study just so that we could demonstrate to the ethics committee that the onboarding of the patients was streamlined. So we did that. We completed that at the back end of last year. We submitted that data to the ethics committee, and we were very fortunate. In August of this year, they give us the approval for that. So we now have what we believe to be one of the world's only trials of this kind approval. But some of the key points that we found through this 3-month program that they asked us to do were, we had a good idea that we were going to get these kind of results, but you can see there from some of the testimonials, the results have been astounding. Some patients, have managed to go back to work. They're reducing on their dependency on other medications. They were so astounding. What we've decided to do, we've asked a third party to do an independent report. Hopefully that should be completed by next month. And already what we're seeing from what we're seeing in that report is better quality of life and the potential reduction in cost of the current medication they're having. So hopefully in time to come, we will be able to present that data to the NHS, and hopefully we will get reimbursed on that. We think that actually it'll be the insurance companies that will potentially reimburse before the NHS, but who knows? So what we're now doing with LVL, we are currently revisiting the business plan with a view then to launching the trial officially within the next 3 to 6 months. We've got a number of interested parties that are looking at partnering with that from a capital point of view, from an equity point of view, that not only will bring capital into that, but will also partner with us to deliver it into the UK. So really exciting for CELADON. So we've got, the 2 revenue streams, i.e. the contracts that we're currently selling to the market, and moving forward, it'll be the contracts of our product selling into LVL. So real big milestone for CELADON. On that note, I will hand over to John to talk you through the numbers.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I dig into the individual numbers, I think it's perhaps worth just stepping back for a second and highlighting that there's a number of different things that have happened this year compared with last. So it was at the end of March 2022 that the company listed on AIM. So the comparative period, 3 months of that period are when the company was unlisted, and it's only 3 months when the company had been a listed entity. So the more appropriate comparison, I think, is probably when looking at the first half of this year with the second half of FY22. And as Jim mentioned earlier, because we haven't obtained the regulated licenses until mid-March this year, and we weren't able to sign our first product sale contracts until May this year, we've not had any revenue from product shipments during the first half. We're expecting those to come through in the second half of the year as well. The operating costs in the first half of this year were 2.9 million. As mentioned, if you compare that with the second half of last year, those costs were actually just over 3 million, so about 3.05 million last year. Given that we have, as Jim has mentioned, started building out the team to bring in the business development resource, to start converting those letters of intent into contracts and start gearing up towards production. Despite the fact that we've also got the increasing inflationary environment, the fact we've managed to keep costs under control, I think, is evidence of strong cost control within the business. When you look at the bottom line profit before tax, there are clearly a number of one-off items that went through the accounts during the course of last year. Obviously, there'll be noise in the comparative period when you get to the end of 2023, but will clearly drop out when you get into 2024. The cash position at the end of June was that we had 1.6 million pounds of cash, and there's a bullet on the first slide, I don't know if it came out, that we have a committed £7 million revolving credit facility that we can draw upon to fund our cash needs going forwards. With that, I'll pass over to Arthur to talk more through the strategy.
Thank you very much, John and Jim. And looking at the poll that's been published on the right-hand side, conscious that there are many new faces to this call as well. So for some, this will be a refresh. For others, this will be hearing the strategy for the first time. Our target as a business really is to create the UK's leading pharmaceutical company that's focused on cannabis-based medicines. And I start there because, as we say, we're not a cannabis company. We're a pharmaceutical company that's focused on cannabis-based medicines. And it's a very different mentality. The business you see here today, we are confident, has all the building blocks in place to sell cannabis-based medicines to the UK market, but also to partner going forward with larger companies looking to develop cannabis-based medicines for the first time. In essence, these building blocks means having a licensed production facility here in the UK that can produce the products and sell the products. It means having that R&D expertise to develop novel medicines like pills and tablets and to work with those strategic partners. And all of this is underpinned by a robust data set, which is our LVL trial. Surrounding all that, we've built the team, the board, and the AIM listing as well to give us that confidence and credibility and expertise going forward. So to replicate what CELADON has in the UK market would take years, a lot of expertise, and tens of millions of capital as well. And what you'll see here is the building blocks we've talked about that have been ticked off over the past 5 years, with a lot of significant progress since we IPO'd the business last year. What this enables us to do going forward is to generate revenue from selling our products into the UK and international markets, and to have that platform with which we can develop new drugs going forward and to partner with strategic partners that come to us as well. And just to stress, this market really is one with very high barriers to entry and hard to replicate what we have done here. So we're confident we've laid the foundations in place to move the business forward. Our strategy and vision is simple. It's to generate revenue from selling the pharmaceutical grade product that we produce in our UK facility, whilst positioning over the longer term for substantial upside potential from developing novel medicines. So just to unpack this a little bit for those of you that are new to CELADON's strategy. It's fair to say that the majority of focus since the business was founded and since IPO has been keenly focused on producing that pharmaceutical grade product. And we think there's a great business opportunity here. It's a highly regulated market, and CELADON has the facility and the licenses in place to produce this product for the UK and for international markets. And the quality to which we're cultivating and producing as well is seeing us get a lot of inbound interest from markets such as Germany even, which is already a large importer of product. And that's behind the 2 initial contracts we've signed this year, and hopefully further contracts to follow as well. So we see this as a great business opportunity to generate revenue and shareholder returns, but also to fund over time some of the R&D into novel medicines as well. But this is the vast majority of the focus today. But like I said, also positioning for the longer term as well. And we see a significant value creation opportunity from developing new medicines, such as pills and tablets. There's a precedent here, such as GW Pharma, which created its CBD oil for epilepsy and eventually was acquired 2 years ago. But that, alongside the real world and clinical data that we see, which has a long track record of safety and efficacy for cannabis-based medicines, gives us the confidence to select targeted opportunities to develop new medicines. In practice for Celadon, this means focusing on what we're really good at. So that's developing valuable IP using our R&D expertise at very low cost to the business, because we've already got the experienced R&D team in-house, the lab, the licenses, as part of our production process anyway. So we can produce this IP and then work with larger partners to take that through trials and towards approvals going forward. This doesn't mean spending millions of pounds of R&D money today. It means doing it in a low-cost, efficient way to position ourselves for very valuable IP. And there's a real synergy here with the product that we're producing in the facility, because we can use that proprietary product to help develop these medicines going forward. So that's really the vision, the long-term vision of the company. Now just turning to the sector review, because conscious a lot is happening in the world of cannabis-based medicines, particularly over the last 12 to 18 months. And at a global level, we remain very confident of the opportunity. Fundamentally, this is driven by substantial unmet medical needs, particularly around chronic pain, which is driving around half to 2/3 of the global growth in cannabis-based medicines overall. So we see around 8 million chronic pain sufferers in the UK, 50 million sufferers in the US, and all of this against a backdrop of the opioid crisis, where patients, doctors, regulators are really looking for alternative medicines. And we believe cannabis-based medicines can be one of those great alternatives going forward. And as a result of this demand, we've seen tremendous growth in markets like Australia, which have now reached around 400,000 patients, and Germany, around 170,000 patients as well, with new markets looking to legalize around the globe. Interestingly as well, we're also seeing larger companies come into the space and start to write checks and invest in this area. We've seen this with the acquisition of GW 2 years ago, but we're also seeing it in new areas as well, like API wholesalers and healthcare companies and insurance companies really entering the space for the first time. As mentioned, one of the real growth areas globally has been the Australian market. And I think it's worth here just taking a step back to digest what's really happened, because this is a market that only legalized cannabis-based medicines 2 years before the UK. And it really only took off about 3 years ago. So from not many patients in 2019, 2020 to around 400,000 today, which has almost doubled in the past 15 to 18 months, we believe. The market's really taken off, and what we see as a forerunner for the UK market. As we've really dug into the detail and tried to work out what's gone on here, one of our key learnings is that there's no magic wand to open up markets for cannabis-based medicines. In Australia, there was no big regulatory shift that opened this market up overnight, but it was a number of things, particularly around making it easier for doctors to prescribe. That's GPs in 2019, that's authorized prescribing in 2021, but also just the virtuous circle of having more clinics, more telemedicine, doctor education, and that leads to more doctors prescribing as we go forward. And we're starting to see this take place in the UK as well. So there's some big lessons for us to learn here, and we are with the UK market. So the UK for us can and will be and should be one of the most attractive markets globally for cannabis-based medicines. Clearly the scale is there with the 8 million chronic pain sufferers and a ready population who are already sourcing cannabis-based medicines on the black market, which we think is around 1.8 million sufferers who use the product. But we're also seeing the growth in a number of other areas as well. And clearly that's playing out in terms of the patient numbers in the private paying clinics, and then ultimately one day we hope on the NHS and through the insurance companies as well. But even in the private market, there's a great market to be made here, as we've seen in Australia. But I'll just draw your attention to two particular areas which are interesting to us over the past 12 months. One is the shift in the regulatory environment, and the second is around the UK infrastructure for these medicines. So in terms of the regulatory environment, in August this year, some of you may have seen that the House of Commons Home Affairs Committee supported widening access to medical cannabis on the NHS. And this follows the NHS's advice 2 years ago to not be prescribing opioids for long-term chronic pain usage. So when we spend time in Westminster with the government and the opposition parties and talk to politicians and regulators, there's definitely a growing confidence and optimism around these medicines and their ability to help, particularly for the government in the area of getting the long-term sick back into work for the first time. And we've seen these data points on our own clinical trial. But the other area where we feel there's been tremendous progress in the last year is around the UK infrastructure. So we see this in the growth of private pain clinics, with more entering the market, with more doctors and patients, but also companies like CELADON that are building that infrastructure in the UK market to produce product domestically and have clinical trials domestically as well. And just as a reminder, this is one of the big unlocks for the UK market, is having companies like CELADON. Because if you have domestic production within the borders, you don't have to rely on importing the product, which is expensive, lengthy, complex from a regulatory perspective, and is all done on a named patient basis. So that's why the CELADON strategy is to have domestic production, and that's why we're so focused as well on something like LVL, which is gathering the data points to give doctors the confidence to prescribe these medicines and to open up the UK market. So a lot's been going on over the past year at the macro level, and the CELADON strategy is laser focused on opening up this market. I'll now pass back to Jim for the wrap up.
Thank you very much for that, Arthur. So as a summary, I hope, and I think you will agree, that this has been a milestone year for CELADON from a licensing point of view and from a number of other things, but predominantly licensing, which has subsequently helped us get to revenue, i.e. the sales. Don't get me wrong, it's been a heck of a journey, 4 years in the making, and we couldn't have done it without the incredible team that we've managed to build. And also the support from the investors, from pre-IPO, post-IPO, the investors that we've took on the journey with us, that have seen the vision that we've had. It's been very, very helpful. So, just to finish off, going forward, the drive now, hopefully on our next presentation in 6 months' time, won't be to keep talking about GMP. It'll just keep focusing on delivering to that revenue that we've always had in our sights since I founded the business. And then the next path forward is to get the LVL launched. Again, when I talk about investors, it just shows one of our existing shareholders has given us the rolling credit facility. So on that note, I can only thank our team and the investors and you guys for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Thank you very much.
James, Jonathan, Arthur, that's great. And thank you very much indeed for your presentation this afternoon. If I may just jump back in there before we move to the questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab that's situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those questions that were submitted already, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. James, Jonathan, Arthur, as you can see in the Q&A tab, we have received a number of questions throughout your presentation this afternoon. And thank you to all of those on the call for taking the time to submit their questions. But James, if I may just hand back to you to chair the Q&A session with the team, just read out those questions and give your responses where it's appropriate to do so, and then I'll pick up from you at the end. Thank you.
Surely, thank you very much. So, question from Simon, very good question. Are there any significant dependencies on third parties? There's probably lots of answers to that. The dependency really on third parties is more around the regulators. That's, for any business, as you can imagine. I think if I'm reading the question correctly, is there any dependency on, third parties to launch? Not necessarily outside the course of normal business. I hope that answered your question, Simon. Another one from Nick regarding competitors. There are a number of competitors coming through the market, Nick, and we speak to most of them. Obviously, they're private, so we don't know too much about them. But we believe the first company to get the licenses that we needed since legalization, and then there's another company in the Channel Islands that got it. We know their CEO very well; he's a great guy. So we try to work with these partners, and there's a couple of others coming through. We don't believe there's any more at the moment got the licenses that we have and the Channel Island company have. But yes, there will be others coming through. One of the other questions you've asked is where are they at in revenue? We're not too sure because they're private companies, so we don't really know. And where they're up to with production. Well, until they've got the necessarily licenses, Nick, They can't really get to revenue if they're operating in the market we're in, which means, production-wise, the product they're producing now is purely for R&D and to get the licenses. But just to finish on that one, Nick, yes, everybody says, competition's good, etc. But what you've got to look at, Nick, is the potential opportunity for the UK market, because it's not opened up. And I always say this, it needs more Celadons. So we welcome, and that's why we work with other companies that are going for licenses. Because what we'd like to do is maybe help them or joint venture with them or things like that, because they may produce a product we're not, and we'll produce a product that they don't. So I hope that answers that question, Nick. The one for Christopher, I'll let you answer that one, Arthur.
So the one from Christopher, what criteria do you use to determine and differentiate between a competitor and a potential strategic partner? I think Jim's just touched on elements of that, Christopher. I mean, we get out and about in the UK and international landscape quite a lot, and are very active in terms of the outbound conversations, but also some of the inbound as well. I mean, for us, it's about, as Jim mentioned, growing the pie overall in the UK market. And so anyone that has high quality technologies, whether that's around delivery or their actual production, we want to look to work with, and maybe do different things too as well. So we do a lot of DD. We work with them, extensive conversations, and really there are very few companies that have our mindset, which is a purely pharmaceutical mindset. And so really those are the companies we want to speak to, not to people that are purely focused on grow and producing as much as possible. It's that patient first pharmaceutical mindset. And then we do our DD to see if they have any distinguishing technology or approach that we can work with. We do want other Celadons. We do want to work with partners. The people we won't work with are the people who would dilute the brand or produce products we think is low quality, or taking a different approach to the regulators as well. So, we're very, very careful with them across the board. I think one more point to mention here, Christopher, as well, is that, in terms of these novel medicines we're talking about, we do actively want to find partners as well. So one for many of you on the call who are new to Celadon is that we have a 20% stake in a company called Kingdom Therapeutics, which is developing a cannabinoid drug for autism spectrum disorder. To us, they've got a great science team, a great approach to developing their medicine. But it's not just the fact we have a stake in that business, that if it succeeds, it could be a very valuable business. But it's also the fact that we get to supply our product, our proprietary API, into their medicine. So if that medicine is successful in the mass market, we have a revenue stream that could be worth 50, 100 million plus, as you see in the pharmaceutical world, typically for these types of supply contracts as well. So really, it's about finding high quality partners that can help us grow the industry and ourselves as well.
Thank you all. So a question from Simon, what is the product limitation of our current facility? And actually a question from Daniel as well, which I can answer both of them at the same time, where Daniel's saying, when is our phase 2 coming online? So if I'm reading this right, Simon, the limitation currently is our maximum operation, which is phase 2, because our facility can do phase 3. So in total, it's around about 9 ton, the whole of the facility. But phase 2, our maximum for phase 2 will be 3 ton. So that's a limitation on our development, if you will, over the next 12 months to 2 years. But ultimately, it'll be 9 ton within this current facility. And in answer to Daniel's question of when will phase 2 be fully operational, that will take between 6 and 12 months, Daniel, but it could be shorter than that, it could be longer than that. And the reason for that is what we tend to do, Daniel, is switch rooms on as and when we get the contracts. So we've put all the infrastructure in place, the shell, the wall, everything's there. It's what we didn't want to do is have all the rooms switched ready and just burning money. We sort of like to take baby steps before we run. So, if we had 3 tons worth of contracts tomorrow, we could have that phase 2 online within the next 12 months. But there's a slight caveat with online, Daniel. Is it ready to switch on or is it product ready? What we're fortunate now is we can start the cuttings in our phase 2 that helps us feed into phase 2. So it will into the wider area of phase 2. So it will help us expedite that. So sorry for a long round question, because it was an answer to 2 questions, but the idea is next year we'll have phase 2 operational. One from Nick: revenue seems monetary over the next year. The reason for that, Nick, is the current contracts we've signed are for our phase 1. We only have a certain capacity in phase 1, and that's fully sold, and that's the current contracts. However, when we move into phase 2 and we contract the whole of that, that'll generate around about £30 million of revenue a year in phase 2. Now, if we then move on to phase 3 later on, we've gone out with numbers saying that could get us to potentially up to 90 million a year of revenue. Jeff, I'll let John answer that one if you could.
Thank you, Jim. So yes, Jeff's question was around the overhead run rate. So during the course of the first half of the year, the run rate's been about just shy of about £5,000 a month. Obviously, and because we've not been have those product sales yet, we've not been generating any gross margin to offset that. As mentioned already, the end of this year, we expect the product sales from the first contract that we entered into to start coming through, which will reduce that burn. As Jim said, we're currently in negotiation with some customers to convert letter of intent into contracts. So as and when those things start coming through and we start modularly building out phase 2, we'll be able to reduce that burn rate. But unfortunately, I can't give you any exact guidance, Jeff, as to the exact month or quarter. But as we get to that 30 million of revenue that Jim's mentioned, we'll be very cash generative over the next year, 18 months or so.
Thank you, John. Another question: do we expect to sell internationally, and what would be the timescale? So our strategy when we founded the business was first and foremost the UK centric. And the reason for that is I just thought Europe would potentially be supplied and by Canada's and the rest of them. However, Nick, since we got our licenses, we've had a lot of interest. And actually, there's a particular pharmaceutical company in Germany that I've known for quite some time. And we've been in negotiation with them for the past 9 months. I have to, I can't say too much because, we haven't put anything out on the market, but we'd like to think in the foreseeable future that we will be supplying into other markets, not just the UK. I think what we'd like to do, Nick, is have let's say 10-15% of our capacity non-UK and the remaining UK. That may go up slightly because of the sheer inbound inquiries we're having for UK GMP product. There was one particular CEO of a company that we've been talking to, and we said to them, because of our current commitments and our rollout plan, we could not get you product till the end of next year and that CEO said, we don't care, we just want to lock in UK GMP product. So for us as a business, and me personally, that gave me a lot of confidence that, there is external demand as well. So hopefully that answered your question, Nick. Watch this space, I suppose.
James, Jonathan, Arthur, if I may just jump back in there, thank you very much indeed for being so generous with your time and addressing all of those questions that came in from investors this afternoon. And of course, if there are any further questions that do come through, we'll make these available to you immediately after the presentation has ended, just for you to review, to then add any additional responses, of course, where it's appropriate to do so. And we'll publish all those responses out on the Investor Meet Company platform. But James, perhaps before really just looking to redirect those on the call to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to yourself and the company, if I could please just ask you just for a few closing comments to wrap up with, that would be great.
Yeah, without trying to repeat myself, I can only thank everybody that's been involved in the vision and the journey that I set out to do the back end of 2018, from the CELADON team, from people that have supported us, even from the media, and things like that. And regulators, to be fair. And I know people say, oh, you just thank shareholders and investors because you have to. Well, actually, I don't, but I really do genuinely thank them, because I was the first investor in the business, so I know what it's like. And for those investors to support us on this journey, and we've managed to get lots of them to the facility as well, ironically after they've invested, and they've been blown away by it. So any of you that are potentially looking at investing, or them that you are currently investors and haven't been to site, you're more than welcome to come, meet some of the team as well, and you will feel the vision that I've set off. So thank you very much to everybody.
James, that's great. And thank you once again for updating investors this afternoon. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This won't take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Celadon Pharmaceuticals PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, so good afternoon to you all.